Good morning, everyone. Say hi to somebody that you don't know in your row, just for the next 5 seconds, and then we'll get going. Well, how are you all doing today? Everyone doing okay? Yeah, is it just me, or is it really hot in here? Are you guys feeling hot? Is that what's happening here? Yeah. Well, go local sports team. Okay. Yay. I don't know anything about football, but apparently the green shirt's what I'm supposed to be wearing, so that's what I am wearing today. This morning, we continue our brand new series entitled Trailers, where we're looking at parables of discipleship, where Jesus is talking about what it means to follow him and what it means for us to invite others to join us in on this journey. And last week, we talked a little bit about how we as human beings have been soft-wired to belong to one another. And we talked about this idea that for discipleship, it's about being able to shape the context that we are in and not being shaped by that context. And this morning, I want to add the next piece to that puzzle with the one about the unlikely hero. And it reads like this. Jesus says, "On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. 'Teacher,' he asked, 'what must I do to inherit eternal life?' 'Well, what is written in the law?' he replied. 'How do you read it?' And he answered, 'Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself.' 'You have answered correctly,' Jesus replied. 'Do this and you will live.' But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, 'And who is my neighbor?' There's a couple of things happening here in these opening lines. Number one, this inquiry that this expert in the law or lawyer has is a genuine one. And in this Jewish understanding of debate and talking, it was very normal to answer a question with a question. So the questions going back and forth sort of symbolize and help you get a good idea of what your debate partner was thinking and feeling. And second of all, he was curious about Jesus. He wanted to know if Jesus was the Messiah that they had been expecting all along. He sort of had him on trial. This was a little bit of a test because all the stories that he had heard about Jesus leading up to this point had left him scratching his head. This was a curious man, and if this curious man is the Messiah, then he is a curious Messiah. Why? Because it seems like he is breaking more rules than he is keeping. He's eating with all the wrong kinds of people. That's a no-no. He is, defying and not upholding Sabbath rules. Not good. And he's not playing well with the other religious leaders. So not only is he wondering if Jesus is the real deal, but now he's also running, based on Christ's action, how far the rules can be bent and what that might mean for him. And if we're honest with ourselves, we've all asked the same types of questions. Jesus, are you real? And if so, what does that mean for me? And tied to these big questions are other bigger questions. Questions like, what is my value? What is my sense of purpose, my self-worth? All these things lead us on a search for our identity as we begin and try to understand our place in this universe. Catholic priest Henry Nouwen, whom we've quoted a million times, and you might as well get used to it because it's going to happen again. He adds this piece. He says, "As long as I am plagued by doubts about my self-worth, I keep looking for gratification from the people around me. But when I detach myself from this need for human affirmation and discover that it is with the Lord that I find my true self, pain inflicted by people will not touch me in the center." And this is exactly where this lawyer is at. He is looking for his place. And he goes about it by asking Jesus about it in a strange way. Because he says, what must I do to inherit? The doing part seems to say that he is looking to perform his way into acceptance, like what Henry Nouwen is talking about here. Perhaps he's looking for affirmation. Maybe he's looking for a loophole. Maybe he's looking for an out. Maybe he's looking for an in. Maybe he's wondering what sort of life he can lead that might keep him far apart from those that may cause him trouble or pain. And then on the inheritance side, it's strange because you can't really do anything for an inheritance. An inheritance is a gift. It's something that you can't earn. It's connected to your heritage. And what he doesn't see coming is that Jesus is going to turn this due and this inheritance on its head. Because our salvation is not a product of what we can do, but it is a result of what has been done for us. And our inheritance isn't based on our bloodline. Instead, it is based on the blood shed of Jesus. Unfortunately, though, for far too often, you and I would rather have rules. We would rather have explanations. I want to know the requirements. What exactly, again, do I have to do to perform my way into acceptance? Sometimes we're looking for boundaries. Sometimes we're looking for obligations. And if we were really honest with ourselves, because this is the human nature, we are looking for the exact bare minimum. What's the bare minimum I can do to squeak by at school or work or in my relationships or other responsibilities? And as we try to narrow our lives down to the lowest level of responsibility, Jesus is trying to widen the discussion. He's trying to widen our hearts and minds and perspectives so that we are able to see life in him not as a list that we have to check off and accomplish, but a gift to be enjoyed and to participate in. He's helping move the lawmaker and us away from the sense that we feel we have to justify ourselves and towards an acceptance of who we are and what we have been called to. Now, as I was thinking about this idea of self-justification this week, I couldn't help. I was looking for a story, some sort of real-life example, and every time I was in the car this week and had CBC radio on, there was a story about a certain mayor from my certain hometown who's had a bit of a tough week. And I don't want to make fun of the poor guy because Conan and Leno and all those guys have had a heyday with him. But it's strange when we as outsiders we able to look in and say, listen to his story and say, well, so I smoke crack. Oh, okay. But listen, yes, I smoked crack while I was in office as the mayor of Toronto. Oh, okay. But listen, it's okay because I was in a drunken stupor as the mayor of Toronto when I smoked crack. Oh, okay, but I really don't have a problem. I have no problem at all. And we are able to look into that situation and say, man, I think you have a little bit of a problem. But I don't. And I don't intend to change. The problem is with other people. Anyone who defies me, he said in this last week, well, their job is on the line. And then another video leaks out, and you may have seen it, where he perhaps was in one of these stupors, and he's just losing his mind. But yet still he says, I am fit to live the way that I want to live. I'm fit to continue to lead this city. Now, Rob Ford's actions are really no different than ours, because we can go by and justify our actions till the cows come home. And this says something about who we are, how well we know ourselves, and perhaps the lengths we go to justify our thoughts and our actions. And Jesus speaks right into this thought as the parable continues. He says, in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers, and they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Now, we have the priest and we have the Levite. These are important characters, and Jesus is trying to make a point come across loud and clear here. Right off the bat, we are seeing that the priest has done this quick calculation in his mind. As he walks around this man that is half dead, he says, you know what? The cost and the risk is way too high for me to get involved. And the reason is a contextual one. You see, in this rabbinic code, this Jewish understanding of dead bodies or bodies that were broken, you couldn't be within 6 feet by law of a body that was dead. You could not allow your shadow to fall on a tombstone. You could not allow a shadow of a coffin to fall on you. There was wording around this idea of dead bodies saying you can't even be in the same airspace. And really, at the end of the day, never, 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 never should you ever touch a dead body. And the reason was you would be contaminated, that you would be ceremonially impure. And especially for a priest, this would have been a tough thing to go through because it takes time, it takes money, and you suffer embarrassment. And the detail that Jesus gives of this journey between Jerusalem and Jericho is an important one. Because priests were sort of on a 2-week shift, and they would go up to Jerusalem where the temple was, and they would do their business. They would lead in worship, the sacrifices, all that kind of stuff, and then he would ride home. Priests were in the upper echelon of society, so he's probably riding some sort of animal. He's coming down, and he's thinking to himself, I have just come from performing the most important acts of our culture, and now I'm coming back to my hometown, so to speak, and how am I going to come in as this strong, proud priest? Look at this, I have done the work of the Lord, or am I going to come back with hands that are dirty, unclean, where I'm going to be forced to be on the outside of the eastern gate along with the lepers and all those other ones who are too sick, too unclean to participate in everyday life. And don't talk about the time or the money. That's a big deal, but the embarrassment is a large piece of it as well. Then we have the Levite. And the Levite is not really a second-class citizen, but he's probably a step below the priest. And if he is walking down, if he's coming down that same road after his 2-week shift, he is not on an animal. He's not rich in that way, so he is walking. And more than likely, the very first thought that goes through his mind is, well, hold on a second. You know, the priest and I left at the same time, but he's riding a beast, so he's farther ahead of me. And if the priest was able to justify his actions and walk around this dead body, if it's okay for the priest to do it, well, then it must be okay for me. But maybe his conscience was trying to get the better of him in that moment. He says, well, maybe I should stop and help, but how am I going to do this? This man is broken. Am I going to put him on my back? Am I going to carry him? Well, that's not possible. Well, maybe I could just hang out with him and just sit here, perhaps overnight, until a caravan comes through, we can get him bandaged up and gone. Well, that's way too risky, because what if the robbers are still hanging around? That puts my life at risk. So the priest and the Levite are dealing with these internal struggles about what is right, what is wrong, about keeping clean and counting the cost. But in tension with these two ideas, there were also a couple of other strongly held relevant beliefs of the time. Number one, Jews were required on religious grounds to bury a neglected corpse. And secondly, for most Jews, even with purity laws in mind, none of that stood in the way of saving a life. So they had all their rules, all their justifications, everything that was in their minds. And then there's this other part that says, really, you are responsible for this. And in a way, all laws are suspended if a life is in danger. Yet, in an effort to follow the rules, they're missing the bigger point. And in a way, it reminds me of this. I want to show you an image here. This is a set of rules from a golf club in Britain in 1940 during wartime. So these are rules for golfing during the war. It connects to this story and it connects with us. Here they are, 7 important rules. Number 1, players are asked to collect bomb and shrapnel splinters to save these causing damage to the mowing machines. All right, it's a time of war. You're playing golf. Priority 1, watch out for the John Deere lawnmowers. Number 2, in competitions, during gunfire or while bombs are falling, players may take cover without penalty for ceasing play. Thank you. Thank you for that. The positions of known delayed action bombs are marked by red flags at a reasonably, but not guaranteed, safe distance therefrom. Shrapnel and or bomb splinters on the fairways or in the bunkers within a club's length of the ball may be removed without penalty, and no penalty shall be incurred if a ball is thereby caused to move accidentally. 5, a ball moved by enemy action may be replaced, or if lost or destroyed, a ball may be dropped not nearer to the hole without penalty. 6, this is a good one, a ball lying in a crater may be lifted and dropped not near to the hole, preserving the line to the hole without penalty. And finally, a player whose stroke is affected by the simultaneous explosion of a bomb may play another ball from the same place, but the penalty will be 1 stroke. So, you and I read this, and we're saying, what? Because if your ball is in a crater caused by a bomb, go home. But quite obviously, like the priest and the lawmaker and the Levite, there is a grand missing of the point here. It is this ridiculous avoidance of what is really happening. And like the priest and the Levite, and like the rule makers here in this golf course in Britain in 1940, you and I also create these temporary rules, these justifications in our mind that, in a sense, are designed to protect us, to make sure that our lives alone are well taken care of. And this is exactly what's happening in this story. Jesus is exposing the motives of the lawyer through the actions of the priest and of the Levite. And he's saying, hey, don't you realize that your motives, your value, and your self-worth, what it's tied to is your own skin, your own self-protection, and you are missing the bigger picture. And when the lawyer asks, well, what do I have to do to be saved? Who is my neighbor? What is the bare minimum that I have to do? Who is it just on the fringe that I have to love? Jesus doesn't want to play this game. He doesn't want to engage him on these terms. He will not allow him to set up boundaries of how far God's love and expectations can go. See, Jesus is pointing towards a love that has no boundary. And for us, as his followers, as his trailers, as his disciples, we can never say, well, I have loved enough. Or I have already done my part. Or, hey, I can pick and choose who I'm going to love and who I'm not going to love. Instead, to be a disciple is to be open to whatever and whoever comes next. To be open to a holy discovery. Because love does not begin by defining its objects. It discovers them. So what if instead of being concerned about just how little we are responsible for and still be able to get away from it, what if we change the disposition of our hearts in the direction of, hey God, what's next? What are you doing? What are you up to? Where are you active? God, who's on your mind right now? Where can I play a part? Where can I work hand in hand with you towards the redemption of all things? God, what are you doing? I want in. Pick me. Pick me. And if we can take a little time out here for a pastoral moment outside of this sermon, let's just be clear, just straight up about something here. When we are thinking about the health and life of Lakeview Church, my hope, my prayer, is that all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength will be positioned in this same direction. A direction that says, God, what's next? Hey, pick me. Because I want to be honest with you for a second. The turnaround here that we are beginning to experience as a church isn't based on one person. It's not based on 5 or 6 people that we pay to be here during the week. It's not based on these folk who are pretty good with instruments and with voices. It's not based on those of us who are the smartest or the brightest. It's not even based on those who have been here, part of this church, longer than anyone can remember. The responsibility for us in turning this church around, for turning this ship, is something that needs to be shared by all of us. All of us must come together with this attitude of, God, what is next? Pick me. Not how little can I be responsible for, or hey, I've already played my part, I have loved enough. No, it's hey, where can I fit in? And there's lots of good ministries that come in and out of this church, and I want to highlight just a couple, not as an infomercial and not as a begging spree, but just to let you know. The kids and youth stuff here at Lakeview need some volunteers. And there are some great people working very hard to do right by our kids. And you might think to yourself, well, I don't know how to do this. I'm not sure what I can do. Talk to Mike or Terry Lynn or Nancy. And if you don't know who these people are, come talk to me and I will point you in that right direction. Because maybe in those places, perhaps in other spots in this church, is a spot for you to say, hey, God, I'm there. What are you doing? What's next? Include me in this. Will there be a high cost? Yes. Will it take time? Yes. Will there be disappointment? Yes. Will people disappoint you? Yes. Is it far greater and far more genuine than stepping around the shrapnel and craters that might still be part of this church and pretending that everything is okay? Oh yeah, it's much greater than that. Are you maybe a bit scared about that? Yeah, me too. There's a lot to be done. But holy discovery awaits us all. Infomercial over. Let's continue with this sermon or else it's never going to end. Jesus continues and says this. He says, "But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he put a man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense that you have.'" Jesus lays on some deadly details in this portion right here. He says that the Samaritan uses oil and wine. Oh, that is great. That is gold. Why? Because those are the tools that the priest and the Levite would have used as part of their ceremonial worship in the temple. As symbols of healing and restoration and salvation, we see the Samaritan actually physically using these elements for healing, for restoration, and for the salvation of the man who is left by the road. And then he leaves 2 denarii with the innkeeper, which is about 2 weeks of wages, to take care of this guy's room and board. And this isn't just filler information. This is integral to the story. Because remember, the guy who's been beat down has nothing left to his name. And in this culture and in this time, if you could not pay a debt, it was either punishable by prison, or in the worst case scenario, you were sold off into slavery to make money for what you owed. So what the Samaritan is doing is ensuring that this man will be well taken care of. And to the point of his own challenge and his own risk. Because again, he is a Samaritan. He really has no say. He has no value in this Jewish context. There is friction between these 2 people groups, and it continues even today. So he is sending his money out. If he had been a good Jew, he would have had legal recourse to get that money back. But really, as a Samaritan, he's throwing it out there, and there's a good chance that it'll never come back to him. The laws are not set up to protect him whatsoever. Because he is a Samaritan, there is animosity, there is a rivalry. Jews believe that Samaritans were of questionable descent and had questionable theology. Some of them even had prayers that Samaritans would burn for all eternity. So for Jesus to use the Samaritan as the hero in this story, he is making it very awkward. He is setting up an embarrassing scenario for the lawmaker. He's saying, listen, even if the dirty, nasty, rotten Samaritan understands who his neighbor is and is able to heave out love and restoration and salvation, if he can do it, please don't tell me you have no idea who your neighbor is. Because through the actions of the Samaritan, we see an undoing of evil. He uses all the resources that he has available. He pays the high price that the priest and the Levite are unwilling to pay. He takes a risk of his own life to save this guy. Because think about it, Jerusalem is here, Jericho is here, Samaria is here. So usually what the Samaritans would do would be walk around to get to their homeland. No, but he walks right into the den. So one of the commentators I actually read this week said the reason why he leaves money and probably takes off is because he's scared for his life. Others might pick up on the story and say, why is this Samaritan bringing this broken man in here? Perhaps he's done it. So maybe he is checked out because he is afraid for his own life. But he risks that. And then finally, he undoes what the robbers have done, and he reverses their action by paying this man's debt. He is showing this impractical and irrational attention to this broken man. He wants to move him towards complete restoration, even promising to return at his own peril to make sure that all the costs are taken care of. So this is Jesus' long, clarifying answer to the questioner's question of who is my neighbor and what must I do to inherit eternal life? Klein Snodgrass, who is a New Testament scholar, sort of summarizes the whole point by saying this. He says, our fear of earning salvation has led to the idea that Christianity is a religion concerned only with what one believes and thinks, not what one is. But this is a shallow understanding of belief. The parable, like most scripture, is concerned with identity. In effect, when people asked Jesus, what do I have to do? He asked in return, what kind of person are you? So that question resonates for us this morning as well. What kind of people are we? Are we the kind of people that set up boundaries and rules and regulations like the rest? Are we the kind of people that puts others on the outskirts, a little bit farther away, so at least we're better than somebody, a little nicer, a little bit more popular, a little cooler? Are we the kind of people that limit our love only to our own kind or to the people that we can actually stomach? Are we the kind of people that only do the exact bare minimum and see our life with God merely as an obligation and something to check off the list, or to say, you know what, I've done my piece, now I'm going to coast all the way to the end? Are we those kinds of people? If so, Jesus takes one last swing to make his point abundantly clear in case we have missed it the whole way along. The last piece of the parable says this. It says, Jesus talking, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So by the end of the story, the Samaritan is identified by who he is and not his pedigree. The priest, the lawyer, and the Levite are all the same person in this parable. They are only concerned with themselves, self-preservation and protection. The question of what must I do is very inward, it's very selfish, it's very self-centered. But when Jesus says, he takes this word do and he opens it up and makes it much bigger and says that needs to be outward focused, that needs to be selfless, that needs to be more about other people than it is about you. One last quote, and then we'll wrap the morning up here. This is by probably the greatest Jewish philosopher and theologian of the 20th century, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who even marched with Martin Luther King Jr. He nails it when he says, there are no proofs, none, for the existence of God, only witnesses. Absolutely. To be a disciple is to be a witness. That is, to be a picture, to be an image, to be an example, to be an identifier of who God is. And to participate and share in the extreme and the irrational and the crazy, over-the-board passion of Christ. Because in this sense, we don't merely relate to God on our own. It's not a relationship that just goes this way. But our relation to God is also expressed by our relation to the people around us. So by way of the parable of the unlikely hero, to be a witness is to embody the truth that God has not given up on you and has not given up on this world. Will you stand with me this morning as we conclude in prayer? God, you're so good, and this morning as we sit with these thoughts and ideas and feelings about who we are, about where we fit, about what we are responsible for, Jesus, this question that you turned back on the lawyer, may you turn it back on us today. May we feel it, may it sit heavy in our minds and our hearts. What kind of people are we? God, if we have fallen into the trap of being the types of people that are only concerned with our own self-preservation, Father, forgive us for that. God, if we have become those types of people that set up boundaries and use the rules that are meant to be in place to heal and forgive and bring life and salvation, but instead only do that for us and not for others, and in a sense we exclude those who need the most love and help, God, forgive us of that. God, for those of us who have created temporary rules in our minds so that we can play the game of life and just walk around the craters and shrapnel, not only in our own lives, but also in the life of our church community. Well, Father, forgive us and give us clarity. Help us to see your bigger picture. Help us to be attentive and aware of these holy discoveries. Help us participate with you in the undoing of evil. And God, may our lives be the witness that you have not given up on this world. Your good and holy name we pray. Amen. Remain standing. We're going to sing one more song as we conclude and then close in prayer together.